Okay, we'd like to welcome everybody who's joining us virtually or online for our Q&A with candidates here at the Greater Hartford African American Alliance. This is part of our weekly meeting, and for the next couple of weeks, our membership is going to be graced with the presence of several people who are running for public office. And this morning, we're going to be joined by the Connecticut candidate for Attorney General, the Republican nominee, Jessica Kordas. And so with that, let us welcome her to our meeting. Welcome, Jessica, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Stan. Thank you very much for having me this morning.
It's good to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running. And you can give us what your vision is, and then I'll open up the floor for conversation among the membership.
Sure. I've been a litigator. I've done criminal defense litigation, personal injury, complex business litigation for the last 12 years. I do very much love the intellectual gymnastics of practicing law and representing people, advocating for and giving voices to my clients. That sort of transition, that I was looking for something bigger than advocating for a single client at a time. After January, I fought in the schools to allow parents' voices to be heard, and parents and students alike were asking after 2 years to be allowed the option to not have to mask in schools. And unfortunately, the Board of Ed wasn't listening at all. Parents of all socioeconomic background, of every political affiliation, were desperate to just be heard by our Board of Ed. I live in Norwalk. My kids are fortunate that they go to a magnet school, and I grew up there. I grew up in Norwalk. I went through public schools there myself. So finally, we organized and I moderated a public forum, and the Board of Ed started to listen. They had their own public forum, and I started to look around to see where else I could be helpful. That for me is the AG's office. It's an opportunity to use that office to do what it should be doing and what it's intended to do. While the AG's office is responsible for defending the state when they are pursued in litigation, they are also responsible for doing so with an eye towards protecting people, towards protecting the citizens of Connecticut. That has not been happening. And I hope to bring back some humanity to that office to make sure that the office is really fighting for all of us.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, we'll take some questions, do a little Q&A.
Sure.
Are there any members of the Alliance that would like to ask questions?
I'm just wondering if we could stop sharing screen. It's kind of hard to connect when you can't really see the person that you're trying to connect with. But I do have a question, so I'll go ahead and start. Good morning, Jessica. Thanks for joining us. I was wondering if you could share what you perceive as some of the top priorities going into the office that you would be looking to address or focus on.
Certainly. So the office oftentimes, I think, is used, unfortunately, as an extension of the Treasury to pursue consumer protection actions against corporations that serve our communities. What I think should be done, and is often not, right now we have an Inspector General that focuses on a very small portion of police investigations. I think that we all know the Police Accountability Act was passed a few years ago, and it's been in place now for a bit. I think it's unfortunately not served communities almost at all. It's not made anyone safer, and it's not held police accountable in the way that our politicians wanted us to believe it did. I've been doing criminal defense litigation for the last 12 years. I know that there are things that can be done to make all of us safer. Sort of along that vein, in my practice, I see 80% or more of our cases have some sort of substance abuse or mental health overlay. And I think, unfortunately, the criminal justice system is often designed in such a way that that is where cases end up when there are other issues. Right now, the Purdue Pharma case is on appeal, but there should be commissions figuring out where substance abuse treatment and what we can do to help people going forward in that vein. Creating those commissions, finding out how we treat people in advance, we help help substance abuse on the front end, put in place long-term thereafter, and make that really an opinion that comes out of the AG's office when settlement money is distributed to help all of our communities, to make us all safer.
Any other questions?
Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. If there are no other questions from the members, I'll go on. I had one other area that I wanted to explore with you.
Sure.
So let's do a follow-up for you, and then after you, Peter, because Peter had a question. So go on.
I'm wondering about there's been a lot in the news regarding the disbursement of COVID funds, and some of those funds have not been used appropriately. And I'm wondering if there's a role for the Attorney General to look into some of those areas where an audit maybe needs to take place, or what other role might there be for the Attorney General in looking at how COVID funds have been used or not used in the state of Connecticut?
That's an understatement, not used appropriately. I think we can all agree that money was flowing to all kinds of different organizations with very little guidance. The AG's office, so I'm going to go backwards a little bit before I answer your question to frame what we're talking about. The AG's office is sometimes asked to be both the prosecutor and the defense attorney. It shouldn't be that way. In the mid-'80s, there was an inspector general that was appointed to investigate misconduct by state agencies. Very shortly thereafter, leadership reversed that, and there was no longer an inspector general. I think it becomes hard to create, they call it a Chinese wall in legal practice. It becomes hard to create a Chinese wall between the folks that are supposed to be representing and appearing for state agencies and the government, and have a person that sits right down the hall investigating those things. There is a place in the AG's office. We definitely need to make sure that money is going to the people that needed it most during COVID. I don't have the numbers or the statistics, and I obviously don't have access to know exactly where that money went. But my guess, my intuition is it was not spent as it should have been. There are lots of examples that we all know about publicly, but my guess is with a little bit of digging, the AG's office has 200 lawyers, 300 total staff. There are lots of investigators that I've had to work with on cases that are very qualified at digging into the fine detail. The AG's office should be used to understand where that money is, and it should go back to the people that need it most.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Peter.
Thanks, Jessica. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Peter. Thank you for having me.
I am a relatively new member of the Alliance, co-chairing a committee that we established called Accountability Now, which for the last 6 or 8 months has been examining issues of accountability or lack thereof in the Hartford Police Department. So I was really interested to hear you say that you thought the 2020 and amended 2021 police accountability law at the state level is not working, is not serving the people. So I have actually a two-part question. That's the first part is, could you drill down on that a little bit more? And how is it not working? Do you
Absolutely.
believe that it was not sufficiently constructed, adequately constructed in the first place, or is it in the implementation that it's not working? And who is it not serving?
That's a big question. So let's break it down a little bit. The Police Accountability Act has some very vague language that has not previously been defined by case law, and it has caused a lot of churn. So I'm gonna dissect it. We're gonna start talking about within the police departments, right? I think that police departments should function in such a way to serve the communities in which they're located. They should serve to protect people, to reduce risk of violent crime, all of those types of things. What ended up happening, and I'm going to sort of talk about this in two parts. First, as what they should be doing, and then what I see happening in practice. What should be happening, right, is we should be able to rely on the police departments to protect us, all of us. The issue with the Police Accountability Act is it takes away some basic authorities from the police department in such a way, because the law is unclear, that police often now don't know how to do their job. Now let's talk about it on the reverse end from the defendant's perspective. When we talk about things, I'll give you an example. Let's talk about search and seizure. The Police Accountability Act made changes so that a police officer can no longer, during, let's say, a motor vehicle stop, ask to search a car, right? But let's say that an officer functions outside of what is allowed by law and makes that ask anyway. There's no recourse, right? So I think we can all agree that cases sit on trial lists for far too long. I think we can all agree that there may not be sufficient probable cause or oftentimes sufficient information to be able to move forward, whereas the state would have a case that they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt against the defendant. And what has happened in society because of this, because cases sit, I have one from 2016 that is still sitting on the trial list. This gentleman is still waiting for his day in court. And it's 2022. There is no expectation that that case gets tried anytime soon. That should never happen. So we have failures in this Police Accountability Act. Look, there are some good parts to it. I agree that there are some things that it did that was helpful, but the reality is it was politically expedient. It was a Band-Aid and sort of a shiny object for our politicians to hold in front of us and say, here, look, I fixed your problem. But in actuality, it's not been fixed. We still have people that go to court and are resolving cases, sometimes with criminal convictions, that should not be facing criminal convictions, because oftentimes the choice is, do I come up with a plea agreement that I can live with, or do I wait until I might someday possibly get a trial? In the state of Connecticut, motions to dismiss and motions to suppress, right, where evidence is kicked out or a case is thrown out completely because there's insufficient evidence, those motions are called time of trial motions. Most other states, New York, where I'm also licensed being one of them, has a time limit. If we had, they're called omnibus motions. If we had omnibus motions that were no longer time of trial motions, there would be prosecutors reviewing files, police being concerned that their conduct would be called into question on a witness stand where they had to testify under oath, being questioned by a competent defense attorney as to what they did, right? So the Police Accountability Act, I understand the intention. I believe that there is a problem with our system and the way it works. I believe that it creates, so I jokingly say that, our court system is a building where convictions are, right, where people go to become criminals.
So if I may, thank you. If I may, I'm a little confused because I wasn't aware that the Police Accountability Act addressed the right to a speedy trial, which is what I think you're speaking mostly of.
No.
Does it?
No, it doesn't. But what I'm saying to you is that I think it failed in actually serving the purpose that it was intended to serve, right? The Police Accountability Act did set certain parameters, and I can understand the parameters, but the drafters of that law did not do a good job in making it clear and understandable. They certainly didn't use prior case law or give examples of terminology that they used. So it's led a lot of people, I think, the average person walking around on the street, police officers, defense attorneys, prosecutors, it's left us all wondering what those words are supposed to mean, right? And there's nothing. I've listened to some of the public hearings. I've read, which there wasn't much in that file. I've read some of the information. I've talked to both, other people that practice and do criminal defense litigation, as well as police officers, as well as union leaders, as well as the people that are impacted most, right? My clients. And because there won't be clear case law for years as to what conduct is and isn't acceptable, we are still going to have this churn in our criminal justice system where we don't know the answer without a trial and without an appeal. And it doesn't serve us today in making anyone, it doesn't serve people in the community to allow them to know what their rights are. It's just been done in such a way that doesn't contemplate second and third order. There is a way, right? So what I'm talking about as far as omnibus motions, it's not been considered, but that is certainly a way that gets us a much more expedient answer to what conduct is and isn't acceptable within the confines of our law, and makes a police officer at the time he's making it aware that it is possible that in 120 days he is sitting on a witness stand accounting for his conduct that evening.
Thank you. If I may ask a quick second question.
Of course, Peter.
Which goes to the Office of the Attorney General itself. I'm not an attorney, so I don't understand the system like you do. My layman's understanding is that the office is as the top legal officer for the state, but its responsibilities are largely confined to civil litigation, bringing civil litigation, as you said, against corporations, being an example, and defending or advising state agencies when they're sued civilly. Is that accurate? And if so, I wondered how the voters will evaluate your qualifications and credentials on the civil side. You've certainly been involved in that through personal injury law. If I were a voter and I was evaluating the qualifications of a candidate for Attorney General, I would look, of course, at their career background, their legal qualifications. You seem to have an impressive history there. I'd also look at because am I wrong? I think the Office of Attorney General has a lot of discretion about what cases it brings, and it requires judgment and discretion in selecting the cases. It becomes sometimes political, sometimes sensitive. And given that, and here I'm going to just throw something out kind of provocative, an alarm bell went off when I realized that you were the attorney that represented Michael DiMeglio, a Norwalk police officer, in his criminal proceedings. You were able to reduce his criminal charges. This is the officer who, along with another NPD officer, was responsible for probably the biggest scandal at the NPD, which is full of scandal. I follow it in the last 3 years. So I would like to ask, what standards of judgment and discretion did you employ in accepting that case? Many lawyers I know say, oh, we don't get to pick our clients, but you do get to pick your clients. Why did you accept the Michael DiMeglio defense case?
So we do get to pick our clients. And I think oftentimes that, as we all know, what's published in the media is not the content of what's actually happened in a case. So I think, we often get snippets. I can tell you that my job as a criminal defense lawyer is not just related to the case at hand. And I know that sounds like I'm supporting the question. I'm not. My responsibility, in addition to representing and advocating for my client, is making sure that I'm holding the system accountable, right? Because it's protecting all of the rest of us, making sure that the state has done enough to prove their case, making sure that procedure and protocol were followed. Every single person, you and I included, are entitled to representation by an attorney. And we must, at every turn, make sure that the system is held accountable. To go back to the original part of what you had said, and where you're questioning what else qualifies me for this role. So in addition to doing criminal defense litigation, I've done SEC fraud cases in the city. I've been involved in 1983 actions at both a federal level and a state level. So we have oftentimes pursued cases against teachers, against officers, against all kinds of different organizations that are associated with or ultimately defended and represented by a municipality. So I think if perhaps better than someone that has served on the other side of it, I understand the justice and the outcome that we are searching for in advocating and representing the state in those cases. And I think another piece that's really important to focus on is that our Attorney General's office should not be litigating cases for the sake of litigating them. And what I mean by that is, it is as much my responsibility as a lawyer for my client to inform them when they have liability associated with a series of facts that have happened, and be able to resolve the case in a way that is reasonable and just. So I think that at times, and you will hear Attorney General Tong saying that it's his absolute job to advocate for and defend and represent the state and the governor and things like that. And he's right. Constitutionally, that's his job. But it should be done through the lens of serving the people and communities. And the reality is that sometimes we have to have hard conversations with our clients to say, look, the people that you are responsible for, they did something wrong, and we need to make it right by coming to a resolution. That's not to say that the coffers are open, right? That we're settling cases for all kinds of amounts of money, but doing the right thing and litigating for the sake of litigating are two very different concepts.
Okay, Angela.
Peter, I hope that answers your question.
Good morning.
Thank you. Not entirely, but thank you for that answer. I appreciate it.
Angela, you have the floor.
Good morning, Ms. Kordas. Just a couple of quick questions, one regarding health and the other on education. As it relates to reproductive rights and all that is in the news regarding the right to for women to choose whether they would have an abortion or not, I'd just like to know what your public stance, if you were to become our next Attorney General, what your stance would be. And then also, how do you feel the Attorney General's office can impact the continual academic achievement gap in the state's responsibility to educate our youth?
All right, so the first one is easy. So look, I think that the court in Dobbs got it wrong. There is a CT Mirror article that just came out 2 days ago that has a very in-depth explanation of where I stand on choice. I don't think that it is. I think the court's wrong. I think it'll be challenged again. I'm pro-choice. Look, I have never been put in a position where I had to make that choice. I'm thankful and grateful I didn't have to make a choice. But I don't want to live in a world where it's not an option. So that's part one. Oh, the educational achievement gap. Look, it is incredibly frustrating. Growing up in Norwalk, I can tell you this. I can tell you that diversity is an amazing thing. I can tell you that our school has hired Temple University to go through and provide us with new ideas about curriculum, how to bridge that gap. It's disheartening for me as a parent to listen to the answers and the solutions that are proposed, because for the first 45 minutes of a very long presentation, we heard lots of every child is unique, every culture is unique, every background is unique, every individual is unique. And at the end, they grouped children by race and gender to decide how they should be educated. I think we need to educate every single one of our children as though they have the most extraordinary capacity, because every child does. Every mom wants the best for their kid. Every child wants to have opportunity. Look, I don't know the perfect answer, but I think that it starts by making sure that parents and children and educators are involved in the conversations, and that we don't have a situation where our administrators in Hartford are making blanket rules and requirements that they, from an administrative office, believe are going to help the children in our communities.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question? And
yes,
if it doesn't,
thank you.
please tell me why.
Paul Willis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Glad that you were here, Ms. Kordas. My question has to deal with what is your stance in regarding to consumer protection, and would you be in favor of expanding the powers within that particular department in the state of Connecticut?
Is there something specific, Paul, that you're asking about with regard to expansion?
No, just in general. What would you do to equip that department to handle more or more of the issues that may come up, and whether or not
you're talking more about like consumer protection complaints, or are we talking about the litigation component of it?
I would say both. I would say both at this point.
Okay, so as far as litigation, look, we can look back in the history of the AG's office in Connecticut. And we know that when Blumenthal was in office, he brought suit against everyone, and he tied up many small businesses for a very long time when I don't think that was necessary. I think the AG's office should be, I mean, look, the AG has the ability to go to the legislature and raise their hand when they see something happening over and over again that's resulting in this litigation. And whether that is clarifying statements about the law or whether it is issuing an opinion to the legislature when they're reviewing some law that surrounds consumer protection, I think it's the absolute responsibility of the AG to prevent those cases from having to be brought in the first place, right? Especially if we're seeing that happen time and time again. Consumer protection cases at a litigation level, right, are driving businesses out because they take forever to resolve. They get stuck in limbo. Our court system, as we all know, is slow and litigation is not expedient. That being said, when companies do things wrong, like Purdue Pharma, right, they stepped outside of what they should be doing. They hurt a lot of people. Substance abuse is at an all-time high, and you know, nothing was being done. They needed to be held accountable for what they did. I think it is appropriate to bring litigation where it should be. But the reality is at the complaint level, you know, when Jepsen was in office, he was responsive. He reached back out to people. He responded to them. I know personally a number of people that have made consumer protection complaints and have not gotten a single response. That's absolutely unacceptable. We need to find a way to streamline our systems so that attorneys or our staff or people within consumer protection are responding, and they're responding in an expedient way. Having things float around or being unresponded to is just unacceptable, especially within that office.
All right.
So
Answer your question, Paul?
Yeah. So would you expand the office to allow for more staff to address these issues?
Look, I think that expanding anything without figuring out where there are inefficiencies doesn't make sense, right? Because we all know that there are efficient ways to do things and inefficient ways to do things. And when you start talking about efficiency studies and looking into who's doing what and what's taking a lot of time and what's time suck, there need to be consistent and better procedures to making sure that things are happening quickly. Expansion may be something that's required, but we have to figure out where we're losing time and efficiency before we make that decision.
Thank you.
Colin?
Good morning. Thanks for coming. I have a question for you as a Republican.
Sure.
What is your thoughts about the set aside program that the state has for minority contractors? And what is your view on that?
You know, we're just starting to talk about this. I'm waiting for some information to come over about this. I think everyone should be on a level playing field when we're making these decisions. The reality is I don't know enough to be able to go into depth, Colin, to answer your question. And if you send, I'm looking at a chat, if you send your contact information in the chat, I'm happy to have a conversation about it with you sometime later this week once I have an opportunity to review everything, and then we can talk about it.
Okay, thanks. I will do that.
Thank you, Colin.
Okay, that pretty much brings us to the end of the time we have allotted. And so we thank you very, very, very much for joining us this morning, and apologize for the little technical glitches that you were experiencing earlier.
Of course, Stan, thank you very much for having me. And you guys have my website's jessicakordas.com in the chat. You can reach out to me there. There's an info email. You can certainly reach out. We can continue the conversation.
Thank you very much. And
thank you.
Continued success.
Take care.
Bye-bye. All right, so that was Jessica Kordas. She's running for Attorney General here in the state of Connecticut, and she's the endorsed Republican candidate. And so that'll end her time. We do have a second guest who should be joining us momentarily. We'll give him a few minutes, and if he does not make it here, we'll end our broadcast and thank those of you that are out there joining us. But for those of you who are watching us, we'll continue just a little bit with our regular meeting. This is what it would be like if you were to join us. Mr. Dawkins, you have a question, sir.
Oh, no, that you didn't take it down.
Oh, okay. Very good. All right, any questions, comments?
did the candidate governor, I know we changed the time from 11:15 to 11. Were they still under the impression that it was 11:15?
I was under the impression that they got the
they got the memo.
They got the memo. However, sometimes people lock into their minds a time, and so I'm just going to give them enough time because it's not 11:15 yet. So I'm going to give them enough time to log in and join us. And if they don't join us within a reasonable amount of time, then we will end the broadcast portion of our meeting today. We have coming up next week Ken Krajewski and Miriam Khan. Ken is running for the Green Party candidate for Attorney General. And we have Miriam Khan, who is a Democrat. She's a candidate for state representative in the 5th District. We have Matt Ritter coming on the 22nd, who is a Democrat. He's also the Speaker of the House, and he will be joining us at 10:30 on October the 22nd. He represents the first district here in Connecticut. On the 22nd, also at 11 o'clock, we have Mary Sanders. She's a member of the Green Party, and she is a candidate for United States House of Representatives in the 1st District. And then October the 29th at 10:30, Alyssa Peterson, who is a member of the Green Party, and she's a candidate for state Senate in the 1st District. I want to remind everyone, all of our members and those of you who are watching us, that we did send out invitations to every person that is running for office that affects the greater Hartford area, including congressional candidates and senatorial candidates. So we do have these individuals that you see on your screen have made a commitment. We've heard from Attorney General William Tong, who is also going to be committing to a date and time, but his communication came in after this was printed for today. And so we do have 5 more slots open from 11:30 to 12. So Madam Chair.
One note on that. I am recognizing that we may have a few more slots available because technically the first Saturday in November, we're still ahead of the November 8th election.
Oh, okay. So that would give us from 5 to 8 slots.
Yes. So November 5th is still it would be an opportunity for candidates to come in. So.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, we are indeed being joined by our next candidate, who is running for governor, and he is Robert Hotaling. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Am I saying your name correctly, sir?
Yeah.
Well, welcome aboard.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, welcome aboard, and we thank you for taking time out of your schedule. To those of you who are continuing to watch us through social media, we're now being joined by the independent candidate for governor, running for governor here in the state of Connecticut, Robert Hotaling, and we welcome him. And sir, we'll give you the floor. You can tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're running, a little bit about your vision, and then we'll open up the floor to Q&A from our members. So welcome aboard.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. First of all, can you hear me? I just want to make sure you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Sometimes I start talking and folks are like, hey. So first of all, thank you again. I'm Rob Hotaling. I'm running as an independent running for governor for the state of Connecticut. And I'm a 25-year resident. I'm a husband, a father. I have 4 young children. I came to Connecticut to attend the University of Connecticut, where I graduated as an electrical engineer. I met my wife there. She's also an engineer. And I've worked and lived all across this great state. So places like Manchester, East Hartford, Bridgeport, Westport. So I have a lot of great experiences across the state. So I was actually not thinking of running. I think my situation is a little different. I think a lot of my competitors, as well as other candidates, often just say, you know, I want to run and do something better. The party, independent party, actually asked me to run. I was thinking about running 4 years from now. But they also mentioned to me that both Governor Lamont and Mr. Stefanowski wanted this governor line, but they felt that I best represented what the party is trying to do and where it's trying to go. Essentially, 41% of the state are what you consider registered unaffiliated. This group of people actually think of themselves as independent. Why? Because they say independence is not part of either major party. And I've been part of both. I was part of the Democrats in my 20s, working on the Dan Malloy gubernatorial campaign successfully. I was at that time part of data and strategy, where I would go around to town halls, city halls. I would collect voter rolls, load them into a database, run my little queries in my own little way. And it would really help to determine where we should put time, money, and effort. I later took those learnings and seeing the inside of what a successful gubernatorial campaign actually looks like. And then later, over time, I did disagree with a lot of the fiscal policies that they were taking at the time. As we can recall, Malloy increased the taxes several times, making it more expensive to live in Connecticut. I felt it would be bad for business friendliness. And look, that's where we are. We're one of the worst in the nation, bottom 5 in business friendliness, bottom 5 in cost of living, bottom 5 in cost of doing business, bottom 5 in achievement gap. We may have a great state, we just have some flaws here. Now, later in my life, I joined the Republican Party ahead of the Trump movement, but then after that, I just couldn't do it. I left. I figured, you know what? I'm what you consider a centrist. I'm a moderate in the middle. That may not mean a lot to a lot of people, but for me, what it really means is that I can take the best ideas from anywhere. I'm only beholden to the best ideas, not a party. So now what are we trying to do in this election cycle? We're trying to make it much more affordable to live, work, and retire. A couple of key things that are part of my message and what we're trying to do. And I don't know if everyone on this call saw the governor debate, but I'll sort of replay a couple of key items from that. First of all, economic plan and taxation. We believe in two parts, right? Businesses need workers, workers need businesses, right? It's two sides of the same coin. We shouldn't be pitting businesses against workers and vice versa. We need to work together to make sure all boats are raised. So specifically to that, cost of doing business, key things. We're looking at eliminating business personal property taxes. So for example, if you have a piece of machinery, rather than paying the same tax on that piece of machinery every year you own it, we can completely eliminate that. What many business owners may not realize is they're actually paying twice when they do that. Once to take inventory, the time it takes to take inventory of those pieces of equipment or machinery, what have you, then you're paying that, and then the town would tax you on that, right? So technically you're paying twice. A lot of people don't see that. The administrative hurdles for that as well can be sometimes complex and time consuming. And that's one way of addressing cost of doing business. Another way is eliminating motor vehicle taxes. There are a number of states who do not basically charge you for having a vehicle or for having equipment. It has been done in numerous states and is proven to be better for cost of doing business. Now, separately, we are well aware that towns get 65% of their revenue, or 65% of their tax revenue is spent on education. So the moment we help towns eliminate business personal property taxes and motor vehicle taxes, as you can imagine, those towns would say, wait, we just lost a bunch of revenue. So the state, my proposal, and again, other states have done this, the state would pick up the tab in terms of funding those towns by raising our education cost sharing model to replace the lost revenues. Now, that moves into another piece of broadening the sales tax base. We believe in broadening the sales tax base. So once we improve the cost of doing business, the cost of living by driving those costs down. What should occur is that we'd get more taxpayers. We'd retain more. We'd retain more businesses, more workers. We'd probably recruit them as well. That increases more taxpayers, which means you have more tax dollars, which then means we could pay down pensions faster. We can keep our rainy day fund intact. And then over time, we could decrease the sales tax rate and or income tax rate as we have more taxpayers. It creates this positive cycle. It's a very new idea. I think folks should slow down and try to, I was just at the the state capitol earlier this week explaining this concept. Even the Hartford Courant, the American Republican, a lot of these newspapers had to slow down and try to understand what me and my running mate are really saying and why it makes a lot of sense. Now, education plan, very quickly, and I'll wrap it up. I know one thing I've learned is that they don't want politicians talking too long. And even to that point, I don't really see myself as a politician. I see myself as a problem solver. I'm a senior vice president at Webster Bank. And I'm not really looking to be a politician for 20, 30 years. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to come in, fix some problems very explicitly, and move back into the banking sector. That's really what I'm looking to do. Okay. I'm not looking to just run and not actually move things forward for everyone. So now an education plan specifically. Right now, we've seen that the ECS, the education cost sharing model, has failed our inner cities. Our inner cities have poor dropout rates. They have poor outcomes for our students. And the current administration has not demonstrated how to solve that. In fact, the state has been led predominantly by a single party for nearly 2 decades, and they have not fixed this problem. In fact, it's gotten worse. We may have a top 10 school system overall in the whole country, but we also have the worst achievement gap. It's really a tale of two cities. You say, why is that? It's because the inner cities have basically been forgotten or not properly led. So a couple key things. We look at switching the education cost sharing model that funds our schools into one that's based on student outcomes, meaning instead of it being based on how much money you make or your zip code or your income, your property taxes, we're switching it to based on classroom size and student teacher ratio, which has been correlated or attributed to the best means of success for students. So we really believe that. Then we're looking at separating, not defunding, just separating and improving measurability of true education funding versus social spending. So for example, a food program, we still need to have those, but a food program is not the same thing as paying teachers to teach students. I think most people recognize that as a matter of fact. So what we're looking at doing is instead of bundling everything and going, hey, we funded Hartford, but really, what are you looking at that? Or Bridgeport and New Haven? You need to say, okay, specifically in this area, we need to make sure we fund a Hartford or Bridgeport or New Haven or whatever properly. And then over here with our social spend, doing that properly. So then another concept that we have that's rather new is raising the level up from regional delivery of services. I'll slow this down very quickly and then I'll wrap it up. So regional economic councils, they're called RECs. So they deliver training and curriculum, standardization. They actually run magnet schools. They do a lot of great things. And they do it from a regional perspective, maybe not a county perspective, but it might be 3, 4, 5 towns that they apply this to. We believe that it would raise the overall standard, even for the Bridgeports that exist within Fairfield County. So applying and doing what they do best, increasing the utilization of that organization. Now, there's another concept called Cogs, Councils of Government. They are, again, regional in a distribution of services, but their services are focused on infrastructure, building, roads, telecommunications. Once again, we believe, why not leverage Cogs that have a good structure in order to unburden our administrators, unburden our teachers, so they can focus on what's most important, which is our students. So that's really a couple of key ideas. Other thing too, we're strong believers in literacy, Right now, 76% of kids can read and write by the third grade. That number needs to be at 90%. And that is what we're focused on. Full literacy by third grade for reading and writing. We also believe in financial literacy, which is checking accounts, savings accounts, what's a mortgage. We need to be teaching our kids before they graduate from high school what I call money math, because you can't get away from it. Every single person on this call and everyone you know is affected by finance, and they need to start understanding a little bit of that, like language arts. Okay, so those are some key areas. Last one, and then I'll gladly stop and take whatever questions in terms of the format of this forum, but is one more radical idea that I think it really makes a lot of sense. I have three parents that are all retired. My father's semi-retired. A lot of them have been in this state for 30 years or more. And you think, and everyone on this call, you guys all have possibly jobs. I don't want to assume, but you work, or you know someone who works. Normally, when you show loyalty to a company, you get some type of defined benefit. It might be bonuses. It might be increase in pay. It might be additional vacation time. You name it. There's a number of things you get from years of loyalty. But when you think about it, when you're loyal to our state, you've been here 10, 20, 30 years, what is your defined benefit for staying in Connecticut? There is none. In fact, folks are fleeing the state upon retirement to go find somewhere cheaper and more affordable to live. I'm a big believer that we should give a defined benefit to our retirees who have lived or worked in Connecticut for at least 10 years. And I believe we should offer them a public option for healthcare. Why? It is their biggest expense. So if you eliminate it, and I've spoken to a lot of senior citizens and retirees across the state, and they all almost unanimously told me that they would absolutely stay in our state. And in fact, the money saved on healthcare, they would put that back into the economy by going out to eat or spending, or you have it. And so now we're moving from what I call an asset-based model, where you're basically taxed on something you have or whatever you are, to a use-based model where, hey, if you buy more stuff, you use more stuff, then you're taxed. So if you don't do those, it's far more fair to our population. So those are some key ideas. I also have some on electoral reform I'd love to get into, but I'll stop. I don't want to take too much time. And I really appreciate everyone just giving me a couple of minutes on the floor to speak.
Well, that's fabulous. Thank you very much for sharing those things and your views. We do have a couple of questions from the members. And so we will start off with Paul Willis, who's co-chair of our Business and Economic Development Committee. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Hodling, pleasure to meet you here today and to have you and to hear your platform. My question has to be with, we've gone through I think it's a question that I think needs to be addressed, because it's not the traditional kind of question, but we've gone through snowstorm emergencies. We've experienced the pandemic. We have seen these kinds of emergencies that are coming up because of climate change or whatever that's going to be happening. My question is twofold, is what have you done successfully to handle a major emergency? And what would you do to handle a major state emergency? And what would be your plan at that point?
Okay, great question. So I think there's a couple of actual other various topics within that question. You mentioned climate change, you mentioned a state emergency, you mentioned, so there's a lot of different things to that. So I'll just quickly and progressively answer some of those. First of all, I think that going to the climate piece, and then we'll come to the emergency piece in a moment. I believe that climate change is the most significant challenge of our generation in our times. I think that there are a lot of folks who may or may not believe it, but either way, I'm a believer in science. I'm an engineer, and I work closely with a number of scientists. So I firmly believe that we need to be careful on what we do going to the future and make sure that not only financially, but environmentally, we leave our state and our country and our world in a better place than we found it. That's one. Two, I believe that emergencies. So I have Never, of course, led an entire state. So I can't sit here and say this is, I have this experience. Neither did Lamont, neither does Bob Stefanowski, right? Legitimately, all three candidates prior to them becoming a governor haven't had that experience. But I can tell you directionally what I would do. Okay. So a couple things, right? So for example, you mentioned the pandemic. I think now when you look back at it, lockdowns were a mistake. Both from now you could argue public health, there's different things. There's ways to be safe with our population, working with our medical community, working with the Department of Health, working with the federal structure that's in place to take guidance. But you have to balance that with those who, would have a negative impact, both economically, psychologically, as well as in other means. So, for example, with lockdowns, rapes went up. With lockdown, assault and batteries went up. With lockdowns, there's a lot of things. Businesses shuttered. A lot of people were financially impacted. So now you have to balance that with the public health considerations. So masks and mandates. I'm not a fan of mandates. Okay, so from a pandemic emergency perspective, I don't think you should force anybody to put anything in their body. I'm a choice candidate. I believe you give them choice. Hey, here's a vaccine. I fully believe in vaccines. I'm fully vaccinated, but I just wouldn't want to force it on anybody, if that makes sense. I would say we have a vaccination. If you don't want to do that, then we have these other options. We invest in tracking and tracing. And in fact, I recommended with the group of other entrepreneurs a system that would improve tracking and tracing at the very beginnings of the COVID pandemic. But Governor Lamont did not listen to me, did not even take audience to it. And we probably could have saved a lot of lives. Okay, so I do believe there's people, processes, and technology that could help do that. So that's one way, which would be generally from an emergency perspective. Then you talked about weather, a big snowstorm or a big hurricane. A hurricane right now is a big example. My wife is Puerto Rican. Her father is in Puerto Rico. The last hurricane, he was out of power for 10 months. 10 months. Most people on this call probably may have not gone through an experience like that, right? You talk about the resiliency of the human spirit. That's incredible. But fundamentally, when I talk to leaders in Puerto Rico, for example, and you go, what infrastructure investments are you making? Sometimes people think about infrastructure and it's an afterthought because they think it's great. But I'll give you an example. In my neighborhood in Cheshire, there's no wires on a pole coming to a house. It's all underground. So guess what happens? If we have a major windstorm, our power and our internet is all intact because it's under the ground. Unless there was an earthquake, it wouldn't. That's what would disrupt it, for example, right? But there are a number of neighborhoods who suffer from trees falling on this. That is an infrastructure investment. I'm giving a very specific concept. So there's a couple of things. There's in the moment in crisis management, which I think operationally I can handle. I handle a lot of economic and financial crisis, working at large banks and large organizations. But I also have been working on physical security, founding a gunshot detection company and becoming a school safety expert, what that would mean for an in-crisis solution with gunfire. So I can speak to that as well. But then I think about, rather than be reactive and short-sighted, which a lot of our legislative leaders have been, I'm an engineer, I'm an innovator, I'm a solutions person. I would look at the long term and make strategic investments and work backwards from that to make sure that we have a proper resiliency in place and we're not just getting in or staying in a reactive based mode, because that's when communities suffer the most, when you don't have vision and foresight of leadership, which I believe I can project. Hopefully that was as quick of an answer, but I can gladly follow up on any of these points.
No, that was very good. And then this quick follow up. What would you do to initiate bringing in new business to Connecticut and also helping small business in Connecticut?
Yeah, absolutely. So apart from the earlier cost of doing business, I have a lot of new ideas that even other leaders have never heard of. So for example, from the technology sector, I don't know if anyone knows what Amazon Web Services or AWS is, but in this world of technology, cloud and all that, there's this concept of a free tier where they say, you know what, put up your business. We won't charge you for 2 years. You have this free tier. And then if you're not successful, then normally you'd shut down, because why? Most people know startups, the hardest time for new business is its first 2 years. So we want to make that a healthy outcome. So if you are successful, then we would come and talk about taxation on a progressive model. to new businesses. Now, if you're just really doing really well, maybe you get hit to the top tier immediately, and at least you're healthy and you can take on that impact. That's one. We'd introduce a free business tier. A couple other ideas. Grant writing. I'm well aware. I've spoken to so many businesses, small business owners across the state, in and out of cities, suburbs, you name it. It's normally a consistent thing. There are so many grants, state and federal, out there for businesses but the problem is a lot of them don't know how to write a grant. And they spend a lot of time, and that's time. It's an opportunity cost. For every hour spent on this, it's not an hour spent on that. And what happens is they take their eye off the ball from their business. They write a grant, they don't get that grant, and then they miss this other opportunity. I believe that we ought to have a grant writing group that can help pools of small businesses and sectors look at what grants are available, look at what those small businesses are doing, and target communities that really need economic empowerment. And these essentially state employees would be helping, or it could be in partnership with the private sector. Depends. We have options to help and target these small businesses with a grant writing assistance program. I think that would be incredible for a lot of small businesses and startups and small, medium-sized businesses. A couple other areas real quick. I've worked at a manufacturing facility. I worked at a 50-year manufacturing facility where I pivoted it from just making hardware into making IoT devices. So I have also this technology background. I understand manufacturing from various companies I've worked for. I understand and speak them. I don't know most people know, but our current Connecticut economy is lopsided 86% service-based. They may think, well, that means the other 14 is manufacturing. No, 2% is construction, meaning the last 12% is manufacturing. Think about that. 12% of our state's manufacturing. One thing about manufacturing is that for every one job, it creates 5 other high-paying jobs. Service don't do that. It just doesn't do that. The other thing is for every dollar you put in manufacturing, you get $2.74 back out of the economy, or you add to the economy. Service-based businesses don't do that. So for me, I would look to bring and recruit manufacturing to get better balance of our economy. I'm not saying service is great. I'm not saying take away from that. I'm saying let's focus and invest on raising our manufacturing and doing what they need to do to be successful. The last piece very quickly for small business, and you can see I have a lot of ideas. If you give me another half hour, I'll keep spewing them out, but I'll stop on this one. Marketplace. There's a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. I don't know if everyone on this call are aware, but we have 100,000 jobs unfilled in Connecticut right now. 100,000 jobs unfilled. So there's an issue with the pipeline of workers not being properly trained to get on those jobs. So for me, in our education economic plan, we have combined it where we're looking at leveraging community colleges or trade schools, or adding apprenticeships and mentorships. We're big fans of learn while you earn. What we mean by that is if I'm in high school and I really want to get a job, is there a way where I can get an internship or an apprenticeship or a mentorship where I come in, I may not make the full amount, but I earn a little something for my time, but I'm also learning on the job such that when I graduate, and that could be at the college level as well, I already have those skills so that I can do that. Now I hear Lamont say, oh, we've invested in early nursing programs and all that, but I don't think he's done enough or gone far enough. In my plan and under my leadership, we would go far enough. So that would be my quick answer for that.
All right. Naisha McCauley, followed by Angela. Naisha, you have the floor.
Thank you. And thank you, Robert, for joining us this morning. I had one comment when you mentioned regionalizing some aspects of services. Good luck with that in Connecticut. But apart from that, you mentioned a wealth of ideas, but I'm interested in what you see as should you become governor in 2023, what would be the number 1, 2, 3 sort of priority that you would be focused on?
Sure. Number 1 priority is cost of doing business, cost of living. We need jobs. We need employers. That's key to our economy. Polls show the average Connecticut citizen still cares about jobs, economy, inflation. That's number 1. 2, closing the achievement gap, the education plan, the earlier points I made. That would be our second priority. Third is our long-term labor shortage. CBIA states that that's our biggest issue. If you guys saw the debate with Mike Heidek and Gracia Gomez, they're talking about how we have a teacher shortage, we have a police shortage, we have a medical worker shortage, we have shortages across all sectors. That goes to the earlier point about cost of doing business, cost of living. People are leaving, jobs are open, and they're not being filled because people aren't properly trained or educated in order to service those jobs. So when you put all that together, that's going to be critical to our state. The other one that I'm looking at closely is affordable housing. That's a huge issue in our state. And I believe that we really need to level the playing field of developers and towns. That's one. But two, we do need to take a look at that. The 10% requirement, there's 50% of the states who haven't even submitted a plan. I think it's a mixture of a lack of respect and a lack of priority from the governor. So for me, I would make sure to go to each and every town mayor if I were elected and who did not submit a plan, and work with them to say, okay, what can we do with your town to make sure that we have the proper level of affordable housing for the people who live in that community, so the people who work in that community can also live in that community. I'd also look at making our cities more vibrant. I think part of the reason we have an affordable housing crisis in Connecticut is because our cities are not vibrant. Jobs are leaving, shops are leaving. It's just not cool to be in a city right now in Connecticut for whatever reason. That's just the general psychology. I think that we need to invest in making these cities greater places to be, sort of like Stamford is, or sort of like New York City. Why is New York City an attraction? Why can't New Haven or Hartford or Bridgeport be that type of attraction? We need to, and again, that comes to crime. The last piece would be crime. I believe the old adage of the best solution to crime is a great job with a living wage. If you give enough people that, I think over time you'll see the trends show that with economic empowerment jobs that would come down. So those are sort of like 1, 2, 3, 4 priorities. That would be my predominant focus.
Okay, Angela.
Good morning, Mr. Hodling. Just a couple of quick questions. One, if you could share your, stance should you be elected governor on just 2 issues. One, reproductive rights, particularly as it relates to the right to choose and access to legal abortion. And 2, your stance on immigration policies and where Connecticut would sit in the process of dealing with both immigrants from foreign countries, as well as many of the folks that are fleeing environmental impact, negative impact of hurricanes, fires, floods, what have you. So both for non-citizens and citizens. Where would Connecticut play a role?
Yeah, so great question. So first, on a woman's right to choose, emphatically, I stand with a woman's right to choose. There's no doubt about that. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I left the Republican Party. They were very unwavering in pressuring their folks. But now, of course, we see Mr. Stefanowski has taken my position of not changing anything. I also believe that we need to, I'm a big fan. If I was governor, I would have signed the same bill that Governor Lamont signed. I think it was back in May, I want to believe. That was the time when it strengthened protections for medical providers and patients who come from out of state into our state ahead of the Roe v. Wade. I believe it was around the time Roe v. Wade was overturned. So I'm a strong believer in protecting our patients from out of state, as well as our medical practitioners. We shouldn't be essentially negatively impacting those people with lawsuits or other. I just think it's the wrong thing. So just to be unequivocally clear about that. Now, on the second topic of immigration, full disclosure, I was born in Liberia, West Africa. I'm an immigrant. Okay, so my father's Dutch. My mother is Liberian. I was born in Liberia. I came here after a military coup. So I talk about the fragility of democracy at times. Some folks have maybe heard me say this. Some folks have not. And just a quick story about that. My grandfather serves in World War II. Saw war, weapons, doesn't like it, ingrains in his children, my father, to be anti-war. My father joins the Peace Corps, goes over to Liberia, Peace Corps, goes to Liberia, which is the most stable, safe country for a long time. And then turns out it turns into a bloody military coup. It's incredible. Around 1980. So around that time, my father brought me and my family to the United States. Okay, so I know firsthand what it experiences like to be an immigrant. But it's a great country and it creates great opportunities. So I really firmly believe we need to give an improved path to citizenship. America is founded on immigration, forced or not, right? As we know. But it's been built on the backs of many who have come from other countries, right? And that's one of the reasons why America is the greatest nation in the world. And so I think as it relates to that, your last point about, I believe it was about environmental issues or disasters or emergencies, and what do we do with immigrants? I believe that although immigration is a federal issue, the state needs to be active working with the federal government and bodies to make sure that our citizens are properly taken care of if they're immigrants. But there are some who've been in line, for example, for 20 years, and then there's others who, for example, may sneak over the border. We have to figure out a best way to handle both those populations. I think it's wrong to have someone or family, and I have personal family, for example, right, who've been, quote unquote, doing it the right way in their country, waiting 10 years at a time. I know some people who came across a border, and you're like, boy, what's fair? It's a very challenging concept, right? And something to discuss. It's more than a concept, it's an issue. And so again, my position would be working with the federal groups in order to do that and listening to all parties about what's the best solution for that. Now, from an emergency perspective, a disaster perspective, or a healthcare perspective, which I think was the third part of your question, I think we need to take care of all of our citizens, especially the children. Children of immigrants who are here legally or not fully documented or what have you. We need, they didn't come on their own accord. We need to do the right thing. We need to have humanity and support these people in the right manner. So regardless if it's healthcare or protection or otherwise, firmly believe. Then for the adults who have the ability and means to work, I personally know this. I have an aunt who's practically a doctor overseas, comes over and her degrees are like, we don't care, doesn't resonate here in America. And you're like, you have no clue how talented or educated this person is. We need to also consider that, which is when people come over here, empowering them to work and contribute to our society, be a productive member of society. They came here, they didn't come here to get a free ride. I don't think anyone wants that, right? I think that's been my message to a lot of the suburban communities who may not understand this issue of immigration. And they're very receptive often to go, oh, well, if they want to work and contribute, we're all for that. I think there's a lot of folks who have a misunderstanding of that. So for me, my strong position would be, how do we get a pipeline and a path to citizenship? And while you're on there, how to make sure that you can contribute and participate. If you could work, let's help you work. If you can pay down, let's help you pay down. And if you can contribute, let's help you do that. So basically, those are my stances.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you for sharing.
That brings us pretty much to the end of the time we have for the...
Stan, I had my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Colin, you have the floor.
Thank you. His name is Robert. Leaf?
Yeah.
Yes.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
If you become governor, first of all, the young lady that came on before, I know she's a Republican, so I asked her the question about the DAS set-aside program, and she basically saying that I guess everybody should be on the same playing field. What is your thoughts about, if you don't know about construction, or do you know about construction in the set-aside program that they have in the state, where stuff's supposed to be set aside for Black and brown contractors, but yes, still we're allowing the white male to put their business in their wife's name to take over that part of the stuff. What would you do as a governor to make sure that it's changing, the policies are being followed?
Yeah. So this is a great subject. I'm not fully versed in all aspects of it, but I've definitely read about it and I've definitely discussed it. So I'll be honest, there's an equity issue in our state, right? So from construction, for example, CENA is doing great work in terms of in Hartford, for example, Bridgeport, other places where they will take abandoned homes and turn them into nice, beautiful homes. And these are like construction, and they work with construction businesses, but there's an equity issue. And right now what we have is this quote unquote couple things. One, lottery systems. Two, closed RFPs. What I believe, again, is the structuring and the approach. The folks who administer these programs may not even understand that there's a flaw. So if I was a governor, I'd be able to go in immediately and address the flaws and say, listen, by population alone, I believe that if I understand this right, 12% of our population in Connecticut is African-American, 17% is Latino. If I understand this right, I think something like 80 to 82% is Caucasian. Just by the numbers, you're going to have more opportunities of folks trying to get those construction jobs just on numbers alone. And so, especially when it's in communities of color, where, Black and brown communities need to have equal footing, right? And right now it's not seen that way, right? So one of the key things I would like to do would be focusing on that, making it a priority to make sure we have proper equitability. So I'll give you guys an example, right? A big one that I've spoken to a lot of people with, BLM 860, as well as a bunch of others who have talked about even marijuana, for example, right? So it's a lottery system, $100,000 per ticket to get a lottery to get a dispensary job. And I don't think the construction industry is that different. Problem is, historically, Black and brown communities, don't have money like that readily available, and they don't have access to money like that readily available. So folks will scrap up to put together $100,000 to get one lottery ticket in on something. Meanwhile, you have others who have millions of dollars. They can buy 10 tickets. They can buy 20 tickets, and then they won the lottery. And you go, well, it was fair. And this is my point. There's a lot of legislators who don't fundamentally understand that it's ingrained in it. There's an unfairness built into the system. So as a governor, one of the key things, my key skill sets is working at large matrixed organizations like Webster Bank. I'm the senior vice president of Webster Bank, is looking at the whole structure, looking at legal. I have a background in legal. I have a background in tech, a background in finance. I'm a Stanford trained engineer. I can go into that and also, from my multicultural background, understand what it means to be on either side of this thing and say, guys, do you inherently understand this is not fair? And here's how to fix it, not just point at it and say what's wrong with it, but actually give recommendations on how to fix it. So I think I'm best positioned to do that as governor.
Well, since you don't understand, to make it clear a little bit, there's 169 towns in Connecticut. There's a set-aside program from DAS. Forget about the city of Hartford housing or whatever it is. We're talking about major projects that are $150 million. There is a set-aside package for minority business. So what's going on is that instead of minority business getting those projects, white males are putting their wife's name inside that for the business, and they're actually recovering those jobs as minorities. So there is over... If you take the number of Black and brown contractors and add them together, there is more women-owned business that's in the state of Connecticut doing construction.
Right.
So just for you to understand, not the houses.
I understand. So basically what you're saying is we've grouped minority where we say woman-owned, actual minority, culturally, as an ethnicity owned, or veteran owned. And so the woman, what you're saying is wealthy Caucasians, their wives put them there. And because it's women owned, it's still considered quote unquote minority, and then they fulfill the obligation or the base requirement for the project, is what it sounds like you're saying to me.
Yeah, so the larger white firms will start a business in their sister's name or something like that. And they're supposed to sub out a certain percent to minority firms.
Right.
They're subbing it to the white ladies that they're creating themselves and actually getting away with that. So there is an issue inside of this DAS system on oversight.
But that's why. So and I think Colin's the name, right? But Colin, I think my answer still holds true, which is going in there and explaining to them the fundamental unfairness of it. They may not recognize it's unfair, and looking at it and restructuring. I still think my answer is still true and correct in that going in there, taking a look at the validation. And I mentioned a closed RFP process earlier. Right now in Connecticut, we have a transparency issue. There's two sides of it. It's how are things awarded, right? And the unfairness of the qualification. Maybe it means breaking out Caucasian women from Black and brown communities or ethnicities or cultures. That's a restructuring or revalidation. That's one potential change you can look at. But it takes someone talking to legislators and having them understand the fundamental unfairness in terms of equity, right? So that's one. Two is transparency. The Democrats or Republicans both can't say anything about transparency. They had total lack of transparency. And sadly, and I say this, there's a lot, listen, I come from the Black and brown community. Folks just vote blindly for Democratic. Who controls this right now, Colin? The Democrats. They have no inclination to really make a change here. We have to hold them accountable and let them know that that vote isn't built in automatic, so real change can occur. So right now they have a fundamental issue with transparency. And that transparency issue is how did you award this project? How did you arrive at this conclusion decision? It's not public. So I'd ask you, Colin, have you ever seen, and you understanding this issue, have you ever seen the outcome of how it was awarded? Do you have any information or any report on it whatsoever right now?
Repeat that last question.
Have you ever received a report of how a project was awarded?
Yeah, it's CHRO has the whole list of how the project goes out, and every time a project is going out, it actually is posted for you to bid on it. So
to bid.
Yes,
right.
The bid.
How do you award the bid? Do they say, hey,
there is a system where there is an open bid where you have a CM, that's a construction manager, and then you also have a section where it's a general contractor. In the CM section of it, it's an open bid. So it's meaning that you put your price in an envelope, you drop it off to the agency that is going to be doing the bid. They open up the envelope in front of you, and you know from that day if you're the lowest bidder. On the GC side, everybody tallied the number to the GC. The GC pick and choose who he really wants to be on the job. So he could call me up and say, hey, you're $30,000 higher than the next guy. And if I feel like and look into it and see, hey, I want the job and you take it for that, that's how that kind of works.
Yeah, but see, the GC has more power in that scenario that you just gave me. So the GC doesn't really have guidance on how they award. There's no measurability to it. There's no quote unquote. Some people don't like to use the word quota, right? But the point is, for every one of these, or every two of these, or every three of these, you do one of those, right? You can constantly go as a GC.
Sorry, so there is. So not to make it go up, but there is a quota, because if it's a state or a city job, there is a quota of how much percent of it needs to be going to a woman-owned business or a minority. So there is already a quota. There's a number that's set that they have to meet.
Yeah. Yep. So, but then further, if the same groups keep getting the same jobs, you're not really spreading to make, essentially the government becomes a picker of winners and losers over and over and over and over again. And I think that that's part of the issue. Again, taking a fresh look. If you've ever looked at the ultimate outsider, that would be me. I've been part of both parties, but not part of both parties, right? And having, quote unquote, no allegiances, but at the same time, being able to work with these folks and win on ideas, I stand the best case to make some real significant change. I know that, it's a long call. We can go deeper into it, Colin, but I really appreciate it.
I got you. And also, too, in your section of the business that you do, that is actually killing Black and brown contractor is actually getting line of credits to actually keep up with some of these jobs. So there is an issue on both sides, and there's an issue with the bonding situation since you're in the banking industry.
Yeah.
So So at the end of the day, the state is paying a lot of money on bonds to keep Black and brown contractors off, which it could be savings to projects instead of being wasted on bonds. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, and that goes back to my earlier point about financial literacy, and I know we can move on, but it's not just financial literacy of the individual. What is a checking or savings account? For me at Webster, just to be clear, I do retail online banking, both for consumers as well as small business. So, and I work with other leaders. I'm essentially leading the digital front end, right? So if you need to apply for small business lending, you need to apply for a small business deposit account. That's also my group, right? And when I look at it, I can tell you right now, disproportionately, Black and brown communities do not understand how to apply for or qualify for lines of credit. And they also don't understand how to work backwards from being more highly rated or considered for better rates on lines of credit. There needs to be a movement of financial literacy across Black and brown communities. There really needs to be, and that's why I'm a champion of it. So these are really great questions, Colin. And I really appreciate Naisha and Angela. So thank you so much.
Okay, well, that does end our time for this morning. And we thank you for stopping by. If you want to give people real quickly contact information, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so absolutely. I'm going to, because I'm a tech guy, I'm going to drop it right in here. Boom. So you can see how quickly I type, right? So in the chat, I do Zooms and Teams and you name it all day, every day. So yeah, Hodling, 2022.com or robertbhodling.com. There's also ctindies.com. So I appreciate you guys. I'm just hoping I can win your support. It may not seem like, and I think also I'll end on this, and I like to end on this, which is 41% of our state are unaffiliated, not a D or R. They control the fate of this election. And if the unaffiliated vote for me, I win. It's that simple. And the state would go in a different direction. So if you think that Governor Lamont and all of the folks that are in his circle are doing the right things for you, then vote for Governor Lamont. That's fine. If you think Bob Stefanowski has better ideas and a better approach to improve your lives and your community's lives, vote for him. But if you really fundamentally want to go in a different direction, it's the definition of insanity, as they say, it's attributed to Einstein. If you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, how do you expect to get a different outcome or different, right? So I would ask you guys to seriously take a look, and your vote will not be thrown away. Your vote would actually show that it's not automatic to either of the major parties, and that they are being held accountable because you want change. And in order to do that, you have to start acting differently, thinking differently. That starts with voting differently on November 8th. So hopefully you'll do that. And hopefully I can continue the conversation with everyone here, as well as all of our various communities. And I really appreciate the time, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so that ends our time and our discussion with our candidates, and we thank those of you who have joined us online for doing so, and we will see you next week with another invited guest running for public office. Thank you for your time.